What if the map of American power you keep in your head is completely upside down? We're told that states like California, Texas, and New York run the show. But the true levers of economic gravity aren't on Wall Street. They're often held by a handful of individuals whose fortunes quietly bend the trajectory of an entire state. The reason we miss this is because we're taught to measure economic health with the wrong tools. Metrics like GDP per capita or median income are statistical illusions. They treat every resident as an equal pixel in a digital image, but averages lie when one pixel is the size of the rest of the screen. They hide the very power we're trying to find. To see the hidden architects of a state's economy, you have to use a different metric: total gross domestic product, or GDP. It's the only number big enough to measure the gravitational pull of a 12-digit fortune. It's a flashlight that makes their fingerprints visible. Consider this. In Arkansas, the net worth of the Walton family, founders of Walmart, equals a staggering portion of the state's entire yearly GDP. In Washington, the combined wealth of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates rivals entire sectors of that state's economy. When you compare personal fortunes to total GDP, you see the real map of power. Billionaires don't just live in a state, they actively forge it, deciding which towns get headquarters, which industries get tax breaks, and how your schools are funded. It's an influence that goes far beyond simple philanthropy. It's structural. Stick around. I'm going to walk you through 3 states where this dynamic is playing out. I'll explain the mechanism that allows private wealth to steer public economies, and by the end, you'll understand why your own cost of living headaches might trace back to a decision made on a super yacht you'll never board. The misdirection begins with how we measure prosperity. Most economists and news outlets rank a state's economic health by dividing its total gross domestic product by its population. This gives us GDP per capita. It feels fair, creating neat charts that put states like Massachusetts and New York at the top. The metric suggests a certain level of economic well-being by showing how much output is generated per person. But here's the rub. Averages lie when distribution is wildly skewed. What happens when one of those pixels is the size of the entire rest of the screen? A single billionaire's colossal wealth can dramatically yank that per capita line upward without directly improving your personal financial situation. Think of it this way. In a room with 99 people earning $50,000 a year and one person earning $10 billion, the average income is astronomical. But does that average reflect the reality for the vast majority? Absolutely not. The median income, the point where half earn more and half earn less, would tell a much more honest story. So why the focus on GDP per capita? It's easy data to present. State officials love it because it's a convenient way to hide burgeoning inequality, pointing to rising figures as proof of a thriving economy. And billionaires prefer it because the metric renders their outsized influence mathematically invisible. It's a statistical sleight of hand. The result is a national conversation that obsesses over minor differences in household income, while ignoring the fact that one resident's net worth could dwarf the annual GDP of an entire country. To see how massive concentrations of wealth reshape an economy, you have to look at the absolute size of the pie, total GDP. It's the only mainstream metric that forces the billionaire elephant onto the scale. Let's zoom in on Arkansas, a state with a gross domestic product of about $151.27 billion as of the first quarter of 2025. Walmart's founding clan, the Waltons, has a collective net worth of around $432.4 billion. Given that the family owns just under half of Walmart's shares, a significant portion of this immense wealth is directly tied to the state's largest company. Their influence isn't theoretical. It's a tangible force. The Walton family is known for its significant political contributions, which often favor a conservative low-tax agenda. During the 2023 to 2024 election cycle alone, the family and Walmart have spent over $32 million on political causes, overwhelmingly favoring Republicans. When you wonder why Arkansas might lag in certain public services, it's worth noting that this level of political spending can influence legislative priorities. For example, in May 2024, Walmart heir Jim Walton donated $500,000 to a group opposing a state education amendment. Through its economic weight and strategic political engagement, the family has a powerful voice in the state's public finance pipeline. This is money that could have been used to diversify the state's economy or support local businesses. Instead, it often reinforces the existing economic hegemon. The Walton Republic isn't just a clever phrase, it's an economic reality. Now let's turn to Washington State, a tech mecca with a GDP near $706.72 billion dollars in the first quarter of 2025. Add Jeff Bezos's Amazon and Blue Origin shares to Bill Gates's Microsoft holdings, and their combined net worth easily exceeds $500 billion. Two individuals account for a staggering portion of the state's entire economic output. This extreme concentration changes everything. Consider Amazon's decision to turn Seattle's sleepy South Lake Union into its glittering campus. This was a seismic economic shift. Over a decade, this transformation, which began around 2010, catalyzed the revitalization of the area, creating thousands of jobs and attracting other businesses. While good for city coffers, it priced out countless smaller businesses as the area transformed into a bustling tech hub. The character of a neighborhood was fundamentally altered, not always for the benefit of its original inhabitants. Meanwhile, Microsoft and other tech giants have seeded a burgeoning data center corridor in other parts of the state. These data centers consume an astonishing amount of electricity. In Grant County, they accounted for nearly 40% of all power demand in 2022. In Seattle, data center power usage grew fivefold between 2016 and 2022. To accommodate this, utility regulators sometimes face difficult choices that can lead to rate hikes for average households, while tech giants benefit from tax breaks and incentives designed to attract their business. The official argument is that these centers bring high-paying jobs. Let's scrutinize that claim. From 2010 to 2020, the median home price in Seattle surged by over 83%. During a similar period from 2010 to 2019, the median family income in the county rose 55%, a significant jump, but not enough to keep pace with the explosion in housing costs. What little wage gains a typical resident saw were entirely swallowed by skyrocketing housing costs. This converts wage gains into property wealth, primarily benefiting the land-owning class tied to the billionaires' enterprises. So when your rent jumps, you're not just paying for lumber and labor, you're paying for proximity to an economy meticulously sculpted by the balance sheets of Bezos and Gates. Their decisions create an economic vortex that reshapes the cost of living for everyone else. Let's shift to Nebraska, a state with a GDP of around $144.4 billion in the first quarter of 2025. Enter Warren Buffett and his conglomerate, Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire is worth well over $500 billion, and as of early 2025, Buffett personally owned about 38% of its Class A shares. One resident of Omaha controls wealth that dwarfs the state's entire economic output. This matters because of how Berkshire Hathaway operates. A key part of its engine is insurance float, premiums collected up front that won't be paid out in claims for years. For Berkshire, this float acts as a massive zero-interest loan. Buffett uses this free capital to buy critical infrastructure like railroads, pipelines, and utility companies. Consider this. Berkshire Hathaway Energy has made major investments in wind energy, but with a significant focus on states like Wyoming. While the company does operate renewable projects in its home state of Nebraska, its larger strategy has involved building out massive transmission lines, sometimes along railroad rights-of-way that Berkshire Hathaway already owns. This can create a powerful advantage over a critical energy route. Meanwhile, electricity rates in Nebraska remain a complex issue. The state has historically benefited from a public power system. However, in the first quarter of 2025, the state's GDP saw a significant decline, led by struggles in the agricultural sector, which can impact the broader economy. The Buffett vortex isn't about overt lobbying, it's about maintaining an economic environment that deters competitors and protects the value of his legacy assets until he can strategically rotate into the next monopoly. For a stark contrast, let's look at a state that, as of mid-2025, has no resident billionaires, West Virginia. With a GDP that has been one of the smallest in the nation, its traditional metrics are low. West Virginia consistently ranks near the bottom for both GDP per capita and median household income. Here, the economic story isn't one of a single fortune distorting the landscape. Instead, it's an economy adrift, struggling with the long decline of the coal industry and lacking a powerful centralized private engine to replace it. The state's economic challenges are numerous, but they are problems of absence, not of overwhelming presence. No single individual is warping the housing market or single-handedly rewriting tax law. The wealthiest resident is former Intuit CEO Brad Smith, worth an estimated $900 million, who is now the president of Marshall University. West Virginia demonstrates that a state without a dominant billionaire isn't a utopia. It simply has a different class of problems, ones more aligned with what we traditionally think of as economic development challenges. This contrast makes the billionaire effect in states like Arkansas and Washington even clearer. It's a specific, powerful force of economic gravity, and its absence is just as revealing as its presence. How do these individual fortunes exert such profound control? It's not a conspiracy. It's a sophisticated operation using three potent levers. First is capital allocation. When Elon Musk moves Tesla's headquarters to Texas, suppliers and payroll follow. States call this economic development, but in reality, it's private monetary policy. Billionaires become de facto central planners, deciding where jobs are created and where supply chains relocate. States are forced to bid against each other, offering massive tax incentives for the privilege of hosting these titans. Second is regulatory capture. This lever works quietly. A billionaire can fund think tanks that ghostwrite legislation disguised as public policy. The same money can bankroll judicial races, ensuring sympathetic judges are appointed. This creates a legal environment friendly to their business models, often at the expense of competition or worker rights. The democratic process itself becomes a tool for private gain. Third is information asymmetry, or control over the narrative. Billionaires can buy local newspapers and consolidate media outlets, allowing them to dictate editorial lines. By controlling local news, they shape public opinion long before a conflict of interest is noticed. Critical reporting on a controversial project might be suppressed or spun positively, ensuring their actions are viewed favorably. Add these three levers together, and you get incredibly efficient feedback loops. Friendly policy raises asset values. Higher asset values provide more collateral for cheaper loans. This cheap capital funds more friendly policy. The cycle is so self-reinforcing that by the time a scandal surfaces, the billionaire has usually extracted far more profit than any eventual fine could recoup. This mechanism works best in mid-sized states, large enough to be lucrative, but small enough that a single fortune can outweigh the rest of the private sector. Let's get back to our flashlight. Median household income tells you how the middle class is doing, but total GDP tells you how much oxygen is in the room. When a billionaire's net worth approaches 10% of a state's total GDP, every budget conversation becomes a negotiation with them. Below that 10% threshold, the old rules of democracy mostly apply. But once you cross the 15% line, the billionaire or their family begins to set the terms. They become the gravitational center of the economy. Think about the states we've discussed. In Arkansas, the Walton family's net worth is nearly 3 times the state's entire GDP. In Washington, the wealth of just 2 men is equivalent to more than half the state's annual economic output. These aren't just numbers, they represent critical tipping points. Once that billionaire to GDP ratio gets high enough, predictable patterns emerge. Local media soft pedals coverage. Universities rename business schools after benefactors. Governors brag about public-private partnerships, where the public takes the risk and a private entity reaps the profit. If you want to predict where the next housing shortage or massive tax subsidy will appear, just overlay a map of billionaire primary residences onto a map of state GDP. The areas of overlap will light up. In this context, GDP isn't just a measure of economic activity, it's a tool for revealing hidden power and predicting future economic trends. So, which states are actually powerful in this new paradigm? California, with its massive economy, still wins on raw scale. Its economic base is too broad for one or two individuals to dominate. Texas is next, with diversification across energy, tech, and finance, keeping it from becoming a personal fiefdom for now. But after these giants, the picture inverts. States in the second tier, like Arkansas, Washington, and Nebraska, behave less like independent economies and more like company towns with a flag. Increasingly, Idaho is joining them. Internally, they operate as single firm ecosystems. The economic health, political landscape, and social fabric become tied to the decisions of one or two dominant families. This has profound implications. The old map tells a young professional to follow median income. The new map, illuminated by the billionaire to GDP ratio, tells a different story. Follow the low billionaire ratio. Choose a state where the biggest fortune is under 5% of GDP. There you'll likely find more affordable housing because the economy isn't being distorted by a handful of ultra-wealthy individuals. You'll find more contested elections and public transit that runs on time because decisions are based on public need, not just private interests. This new map is a practical guide for navigating the real economic landscape of America. But is this cycle inevitable? History offers two powerful reset buttons. The first is technological shocks. Disruptive innovations like the railroad or internet create new industries and new fortunes, sometimes displacing old power structures. The problem is, this method is unreliable. It doesn't dismantle the underlying mechanism of concentrated power. It often just shifts who holds it. The second reset button is more deliberate and within our control: democratic supermajorities. This approach requires rare political will but has proven effective. In the early 1900s, a populist coalition, fueled by discontent over the robber barons, passed constitutional amendments that introduced the federal income tax and the direct election of senators. These reforms rebalanced the scales of power for half a century. Today, a similar package of reforms could shave the billionaire to GDP ratio back below the dangerous 15% line. This could include a robust wealth tax on fortunes over $1 billion, matching public campaign funds to drown out mega donors, and aggressive anti-monopoly breakups to dismantle corporate giants. The catch is that you need a federal standard. Any single state that goes it alone risks immediate capital flight, as billionaires move their assets to more favorable states. This creates a race to the bottom. However, there's a clever workaround. Tie the tax not to where a billionaire claims domicile, but to the location of their real, tangible assets. Land, pipelines, and server farms can't move to Bermuda. Interestingly, several states, including California and New York, have drafted bills to do just that. If they pass, watch how fast the map of billionaire influence rearranges itself. Call to action. If you want to know when your own state is about to cross that critical billionaire threshold, download the simple datasheet linked below. Punch in your state's latest GDP and the net worth of its richest resident, and the spreadsheet will instantly flag the risk level. It's an eye-opening tool. While you're at it, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next week, we're going to use this same framework to rank which foreign countries are quietly becoming company towns for American tech fortunes. That list will surprise you even more. The story we're sold about state competition is a romanticized one. We're told states compete on educated workforces or quality of life. The real contest is often simpler. How much of your state's entire economy can one person effectively buy and control? GDP brutally exposes this concentration of power. Per capita stats are masters of disguise. They hide it. In states like Arkansas, Washington, and Nebraska, the numbers are so extreme that policy is no longer negotiated in public hearings. It's pre-decided in shareholder letters and boardrooms. The public process becomes a rubber stamp for private interests. You can see the opposite in a state like West Virginia, which has no resident billionaires. Its economic struggles are real, but are not the product of one private fortune warping the system. Therefore, GDP is the main metric to measure the impact of billionaires on a state, as it shows both the immense influence in some states and the vacuum in others. The good news is that once you understand this ratio, you gain an incredible predictive power. You can anticipate where housing will become unaffordable, where massive tax breaks will flow, and where public services will begin to starve long before it hits the headlines.